In 2002, 7 years after the release of Seven, New Line Cinema bought a spec script called Solace. Their goal was to turn it into a sequel to Seven called 8, with an 8 in the title.
5 dog, now 5.
Gibberish?
No, that's just the confusing title Disney gave the 5th Snow Dogs movie. The S's are 5.
Sequels, like remakes, are popular in Hollywood because they come with a built-in audience. They are less risky than an original movie. Why did people at New Line think a Seven sequel would be a good idea? Who knows? Maybe because another serial killer sequel just made 4 times its budget the year before. That might have something to do with it. In this video, we're going to dive into the 7 sins of Solace, the artist formerly known as 8. And as a bonus, we'll discuss what happens when one of your main stars and the director don't want to do a sequel, but you go ahead and make the movie anyways.
It's such a profitable franchise at this point.
Has it become a franchise? I don't know.
Well, it's...
Sin number 1, copycat killer. So what was the plan with 8? The premise is a psychic is helping the police find a serial killer. And you're thinking, how does that connect to 7? Was someone in 7 psychic? Did I miss that? No. In the 8 rewrite, Somerset, the Morgan Freeman character from 7, is just psychic. Somewhere after this,
John Doe has the upper hand.
he developed psychic powers and, yeah, sure.
Alright, laugh it up.
They took the idea to David Fincher and he was like, I would have less interest in that than I would in having cigarettes put out in my eyes. After Fincher passed on it and it seemed impossible to turn it into a 7 sequel, the name 8 was dropped again and it went into production as Solace, and it stayed on a shelf for 2 years before being released. Solace is what you get when you violently smash 7 and Silence of the Lambs together, file off the serial numbers and add spinny camera because dialogue is boring.
This isn't even close to our guy.
Solace is the story of a psychic doctor helping the FBI track down a serial killer. That's definitely something new for Anthony Hopkins, right? Hannibal Lecter obviously wasn't psychic in Silence of the Lambs. He knew things because he knew them. He knew Buffalo Bill through a former patient.
What did you mean by fledgling killer?
And anything he said about Clarice falls into the educated guess category.
But you're not more than 1 generation from poor white trash, are you, Agent Starling?
However, in Solace, Anthony Hopkins is just doing a very flat impression of Hannibal Lecter. Reluctant to help, occasionally sinister, and there's a whole scene of him just tearing into the female FBI profiler, and unlike in Silence of the Lambs, where he's psychoanalyzing Clarice and fishing for a response, in Solace he just uses his psychic powers to tell her about her own past and to humiliate her, which does not play into her character or the rest of the movie at all, and it does not relate to the theme. It's there to tell us about her character without the heavy lifting of showing us through her actions.
And that's why you pretend to be so foul-mouthed, hip, slick and cool.
So 50% of the movie is very much just Silence of the Lambs. An FBI profiler and her partner hunting down a serial killer, and they go to Anthony Hopkins for help. There's a scene where the FBI finds a note with 4:16 on it, and the profiler lady thinks it's a Bible verse, but Anthony Hopkins smugly tells her,
That's the time, 4:16 precisely.
he knows everything, see? The other half of the movie is just someone misremembering 7 to you while also trying to put a clever twist on it. It's 7, but instead of killing people as retribution, he's killing them out of mercy. Like 7, the killer doesn't get much screen time until the end, where he drops his thesis statement on the protagonist. And we have a final showdown with cops too far away to intervene, the killer needing the protagonist to finish his work. Oh, and this.
We can talk about that in 7 minutes.
7 minutes?
It's when you're gonna kill someone.
Who might that be?
Me.
In the words of the director, the film has an influence of 7 and Silence of the Lambs, but tried to flee the genre. I do not think Solace is a serial killer movie. It is only its outer layer. In the background, the film is much more than that, talking about life and death and raising some interesting moral dilemmas. It seems to imply that Solace, unlike other serial killer movies, has something deeper to say, about life and death. And here's the issue with that. Movies can be about things without the characters literally explaining the theme to the camera. You can find the theme of the movie in the character arcs and the way the characters relate to each other. My point is that any well-made movie or piece of art is trying to say something more than what it's literally about. To put your movie out there as fleeing the genre because it's not like a regular serial killer movie. It's a deep serial killer movie where the killer shares his thesis statement. It's like a book report analysis of your influences. And it's even weirder if you're saying it while comparing it to Seven, a movie that literally has multiple scenes where characters discuss the deeper meaning of the movie and its themes.
Only in a world this shitty could you even try to say these were innocent people and keep a straight face.
Like, it's not like Seven is just random murders, slasher style, without a point. In fact, the only person we see die on screen is the killer. Seven is about retribution, about good and evil, and about humanity and its sins. There's a reason why Somerset has a similar worldview as John Doe, the killer, and is in opposition with his own naive and idealistic partner David. You can't replace any of the characters or plot points of the movie and still make the same point. But Solace, the movie that has deeper meaning hidden in the background somewhere, has cardboard cutout characters say things like,
Don't you get it? It's mercy killing.
Anyway, so let's talk about those characters. Sin number 2, writing bad. Stories that are about police investigations are about information. What do we know about the killer? What leads do the cops have? Does the killer know that they are on his trail? That's already a lot of exposition to get across to a viewer, which can be quite natural if the characters are figuring out the clues in real time. What's not really natural, and what you definitely don't want to do on top of all the necessary exposition, is tell the audience about your characters instead of showing what they are like. Instead of showing us John and how he deals with the death of his daughter, we get this.
Ever since his daughter Emma died, leukemia in his arms.
Catherine is just like flipping through his personnel file, which just has all of his family photos conveniently ordered to push this exposition dialogue forward.
What happened to his wife?
Before I go on, let's do a basic breakdown of the plot. FBI agents Joe and Catherine are hunting a serial killer who kills seemingly random people by stabbing them in the neck.
Painless execution.
They've just found their third victim, which is elegantly shown to us like this. Show don't tell, am I right? They have no lead whatsoever, so they decide to ask the doctor John Clancy for help on the case. He's a psychic that has helped the FBI in cases before, but he stopped when his daughter died of leukemia.
Ever since his daughter Emma died, leukemia.
It turns out later in the movie that the killer is also a psychic, and he's mercy killing people with terminal illnesses to save them from a painful death down the line. While on the trail of the killer, Joe gets shot by another killer.
You're not him.
And in the hospital, it turns out he actually had terminal cancer, and he dies. The killer, Charles, reveals himself to John and tells him he arranged for Joe to be killed like that because it's less painful and his family get more money. The killer and John have a few scenes of chasing each other and arguing about the theme of the movie, and then in the final confrontation on the subway, the killer tells John he's also terminally ill and that John has to shoot him to continue his work, and also because he's going to try to kill Catherine. We see what happens when John doesn't try killing him. Catherine dies, and he's grown so fond of her, like having his daughter back, or so we're told. So John shoots the killer, and Catherine survives. In the final scene, he meets up with his estranged wife, and as they hug, we see, plot twist, he mercy killed his own daughter. And I haven't even scratched the surface of all the dumb bullshit that happens.
Frogs.
The premise of the movie isn't terrible. I still don't know what they were cooking at New Line, thinking it would be a good sequel to Seven, but this movie could have been a whole lot better if there was more focus on developing characters through their actions and saving the exposition for the murder investigation. Catherine, for instance, could literally be replaced by a cardboard cutout of Jodie Foster, and the movie would be exactly the same. Her character adds literally nothing to the theme of the movie, and everything I know about her has been told to me. Like that one scene where John eviscerates her using his powers, and about that. Sin number 3, inconsistent powers.
I am either gonna fly or ruin that family's picnic.
Hey, you've ruined our picnic!
Psychic!
The psychic, clairvoyant powers in this movie are inconsistent and work based on what the plot demands. Whenever it serves the plot, John only gets random and vague symbolic flashes. Ooh, a hot dog with ants on it. Ooh, people on a beach, what could it mean? But sometimes he sees exactly how something will potentially play out, and then he has the option to make different decisions. Like how he avoids getting shot in the head in this scene, even though there's no way Catherine could have made it all the way over there without the killer seeing her. Or how he saves Catherine from dying in the final showdown. Does anything in this movie get resolved by John's psychic superpower, Or is it just to make him seem clever? It would be kind of stupid to use his psychic abilities to actually solve anything that they couldn't find the clues to, because that would be an easy way out of telling a detective story. Remember, it's all about information. So a lot of the movie is just Anthony Hopkins throwing something wild out there, the FBI finding actual evidence within seconds, and John being like, "See, I told you, I am so smart." Here he realizes something 2 seconds before the suspect says it.
He left her.
I was leaving her.
Wow, what a useful power.
He left her for someone else.
I was leaving her for someone else.
Psychic!
In the scene where they chase the other killer, John uses his psychic powers to navigate, but instead of telling Catherine to start driving before the car passes so they can ram him, he tells her after he already drove past, so they can continue chasing him. Thanks, John. Super helpful. And that's the core of the issue of the powers. At best, we have to keep confirming he's totally psychic, but doesn't know everything, because that's kind of spoiling the detective whodunit story. And at worst, we have to keep changing his powers so that he doesn't find the killer too quickly. The killer, meanwhile, has omniscient fucking powers and knows everything about everyone everywhere, with one exception.
That wasn't supposed to happen.
He's totally in control and is just always 50 steps ahead, and yeah, I'm starting to realize this movie was a bad idea. Sin number 4, spinny camera. Okay, I'm gonna spend a long time on the cinematography and editing because they are most obviously incompetent. Like, give you a headache and make you nauseous incompetent. And my takeaway from this movie is that the director wanted to throw every funky shot type and filmmaking gimmick at the wall and just see what sticks. And I do mean everything. There are so many moments where a character is shot through a mirror, I can't even count them. So many that I didn't even realize Anthony Hopkins was mirrored here until I saw him in the background of the shot. There's a point in the movie where Psychic John touches this dead woman and sees her get home to find a filled bathtub, and this is the way they decide to show her dancing around the room to the bath. This amazing special effect returns later in the movie where the killer is like, "Tee-hee, catch me if you can." There's a scene where they think they've found a suspect and it's the husband of the last victim, which already makes no sense based on established MO or other victims. You know, let's ignore that for a second. And while this dude is being interviewed, the camera just spins around them because... what is this trying to tell us? It's nauseating, the movement is completely unmotivated, it goes nowhere. Meanwhile, on the other side of the glass, there's a steady shot on John. When John enters the interrogation room to deliver the final blow to the husband by guessing, or I guess, knowing his way through the actual answers, the camera doesn't move in a crazy way. I think the reasoning behind this choice was to show that the cops were just stumbling in the dark, but, John knows everything. It's like this movie was just shot without a single thought about how the filmmaking reinforces a story, or, what's happening in the frame. And about that? Sin number 5. What 180-degree rule? What's the reason to cut from one shot to another shot? Hollywood editing is usually in service of the narrative and continuity. Shot reverse shot is classic because we want to see what the character is looking at, or we want to see the reaction of a character to something being said. Solace takes the concept of continuity editing, thinks it's way too boring, and wipes its ass with it.
Immediate, according to the coroner. Painless execution.
John and Joe, why did the screenwriter give them similar names? Go to John's house for breakfast, and here are the shots we see in order. We then cut to this angle, which, what is this? Half of the frame is covered by something blurry in the foreground. There's a couch blocking most of the shot. The camera pans just enough for the blurry stuff to be out of frame to this medium close-up of Joe and his wife. Medium close-up on Anthony Hopkins. Cut to a medium close-up of the sun when John mentions family's doing good, which is motivated, but we have not had an establishing shot of the space. Where is this kid? Who knows? Back to the medium close on Hopkins, it's a steady tripod shot. Medium close-up on Joe and his wife. She is moving around while standing and he's sitting. The framing is mega awkward and the camera is just like, whoa, 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 stop moving, as it's trying to follow the characters around. It's back and forth between these shots. I hope you enjoy only seeing the top of Jeffrey Dean Morgan's head. The camera tracks the wife as she walks away and we pan to Joe's face, which is fine, I guess, except in doing so, the 180-degree rule is broken. That's not a big deal. It's not a law you're not allowed to break or anything. It's just a bit jarring. And then we get the shot that absolutely broke me. It's a reaction shot of Anthony Hopkins. It's also a break of the 180-degree rule, or I guess it continues the line crossing from the last shot, but it's inexplicably shot through a window. What was the point of this? We also barely get to see his reaction because he's in profile, which seems to be the most important reason to cut to this shot. And when the wife says, "She still loves you, John," she is simultaneously turning around to the kitchen while we just see the top of Jeffrey Dean Morgan's head before the camera pans down to his reaction. This takes way too long and is also possibly the worst fucking way to block this scene. After the through the window shot, we return to the medium shot with a 25% couch in it. For the added touch, while it's behind Hopkins, it's also to the left of him, which if you're following along is on the other side of the 180-degree rule, which we established in the last two shots. But I guess this movie likes things moving in circles, so that tracks. The next shot is back to the through the window shot, and at this point, I completely lost my grasp on whatever is going on in this scene and my sanity. The reaction shot of Joe is also on the new side of the 180-degree line, so I guess we're staying here now. Well, the next shot is back to the medium with a toaster in front on the other side of the 180 again, so like, fuck you. Dialogue scenes and exposition are so boring, am I right? But don't worry, because the wife walks in front of the frame as the camera pans up. Seriously, we're gonna keep it in like this? We then get this amazing edit that doesn't seem to follow any of the movement at all. We get this close-up on the kid grabbing his backpack and then on Joe. It's shaking all over as if the camera operator had no idea what to focus on. And then back to the couch shot, and it's literally half the fucking frame. Why is it like this? At one point, Joe puts his face down, and I'm just looking at the top of his head, the back of John's head, and a whole lot of couch. This whole movie is shot like Succession, but instead of following the action and the characters looking for the best reaction, the camera just flails around wildly trying to follow actors as they move wherever, which is often behind an object, another actor, out of frame. And you know, we'll just keep it in the movie like this. And I have no idea why the movie is like this, because it was shot 5 years before Succession started. And it's very different from its influences. Imagine if in that scene where Clarice first meets Hannibal, the camera spins wildly around them like, whoa, this is so intense. Sin number 6, the mistakes. Okay, quick lightning round, let's go.
Okay, let's go.
Catherine leaves a file for John, really stresses it. Here's the file, and it's gone.
I'll leave the case files here.
Joe tries to debunk John's theory about every victim being terminally ill by saying this.
Not only was he healthy, his parents were Christian Scientists. They don't believe in medicine, so the boy doesn't even have a medical file.
Gibberish?
They have to ask the parents of a murder victim if they can exhume his body because they need an autopsy. Didn't they do an autopsy when they found him? Isn't that like standard procedure for murder victims? The killer actually says this later on.
There's always an autopsy, and that's when the pre-existing condition is found.
There's always an autopsy.
Well, not in this case, Mr. Killer. I thought you knew everything.
He knows everything.
John is looking at the crime scene photos of the victims, and he asks if all of the photos are post-mortem.
These photos are all post-mortem.
What? Aren't you a doctor? Catherine says this isn't even close to our guy on a crime scene where the victim is quite literally splashed on the wall. And as a reminder, the guy they are chasing kills people with an ice pick to the neck, you know.
Painless execution.
Why were you there? Like, I don't need to be psychic to tell you that's not your guy. This sniffing dog vanishes from existence, not once, but twice. Once here, which is fine because some time seems to have passed, but then he comes back here, unannounced, and then he's just gone again. When they find the other killer, they have their guns raised. The guy then drops his mug, and in the very next frame, their guns are down and they're turned away from this dude slightly. Like, continuity errors aren't always a big deal. They happen, but this one leads to one of the main characters getting shot. In the final showdown, John shoots Charles with a hollow point bullet. We know that because of this cheesy slow motion shot, but the bullet then just goes straight through him, which is not how hollow points work. And this point feels the most nitpicky, but if we're gonna spend 7 seconds on a slow motion shot of a bullet, like, why call attention to it that way? And finally, John also gets hit in the final showdown. He's clearly hit somewhere on his cheek or the side of his head, close to his ear. He's bleeding a lot anyway. The very next shot, he's in the hospital with a scar on his forehead, nowhere near where the blood is coming from, and Catherine tells him,
The surgery was a success.
Good.
He said the bullet went Clean through.
Excuse me, what? Where did this man get hit? He looked fine in the last scene and the bullet went through, so which surgery? Why is there a scar on his forehead? Why? Sin number 7. This movie should have borrowed more from the genre. Okay, let's talk about 7 for a little bit. In an effort to see if there were any crazy shots or edits in 7, I watched it again, and you know what? Of course there weren't any crazy shots or edits. It's damn near perfect. The cuts and framings have purpose, have meaning, and oh yeah, the camera doesn't move like it was filmed in a fucking earthquake. There's a neat little thing where if you pay attention to Gwyneth Paltrow, you'll notice she's often in a close-up or framed by lines and shapes that look like she's in some sort of square or...
What's in the box?
There are moments where actors are slightly overlapping each other, but it's not done in a distracting way. In fact, when it happens in this scene, they're facing opposite directions, still have their own space in the frame. There's no random furniture blocking the shot. Wild.
You're looking for me.
The camera in 7 is pretty static for most of the movie, but that's because what's happening inside the frame, the blocking, the set design, the acting, is often dynamic and effective enough. The most camera movement we get is in the last scene, and it's coming from the perspective of the helicopter floating above. It makes sense that this has that much movement. The team in the helicopter are floating far away because of the power cables, and they have no idea what's going on down on the ground. The most movement on the ground in this scene is this quick pan to Morgan Freeman's character Somerset after he's seen the inside of the box and realizes the game John Doe is actually playing. The camera angle also changes. It's no longer looking up at him, but at eye level. When he says John Doe has the upper hand, he shuffles backwards from the up angle and slinks into the corner. The camera doesn't move. This is all Morgan Freeman's performance and the blocking. The very next shot is John Doe, shot from below, blotting out the sun. He quite literally has the upper hand now. Before the box showed up, he was on his knees with Mills towering over him or in the background with Mills in the foreground. There's actually also some shaky cam in this scene. It's whenever the focus of the shot is David Mills. This makes complete emotional sense. He doesn't know what's going on. Somerset and Doe do know. The camera stops moving when Doe is on screen alone because he's in control. He's the winner of the scene and of the movie. Oh, and look how cool this is. David tries to regain control of the scene by standing over him and pushing him with the gun. The director of Solace took one look at all of that and said, you know, that's kind of boring. What if the camera moves wildly and I zoom in like this is some episode of CSI Miami? Conclusion. Is it a franchise? I don't know. Solace is what happens when the director thinks his audience will be bored quickly and won't follow the plot without being explicitly told what everything means. Mystery and tension are dead and spinny camera killed them.
You want me to go on?
But we have no idea how close we came to this actually being a 7 sequel. I promised to come back to the movie that probably inspired the 7th sequel, and it also didn't have the blessing of the director and one of its stars. In 2001, Hannibal, the sequel to Silence of the Lambs, came out. But unlike 8, the director and one of its stars not signing on was just a small bump in production. There were 15 rewrites to attempt to keep Jodie Foster on board, but she didn't agree with the direction they had written for Clarice. Jonathan Demme also wasn't thrilled, but then the movie still went into production with Ridley Scott directing and Julianne Moore playing Clarice. Hannibal is not a bad movie, by the way. We don't have a Solace situation on our hands. It's competently made, and there are some iconic moments. While I respect Julianne Moore's decision to not just copy Jodie Foster,
I'm like, I'm not gonna be Jodie. There's no way. And I'm not in that movie. I'm in this movie.
I don't like her take on Clarice. I also don't like the way Clarice gets disgraced at the beginning of the movie to push her into the rest of the story. That makes a little sense to me. In short, Hannibal is a sequel that did happen without the director or Jodie Foster. And it's fine. It's not as good as Silence, obviously. Was it necessary? I don't think so, and neither does Anthony Hopkins. In an interview with The Wrap in 2016, he said he regretted playing Hannibal Lecter more than once. Some movies don't need sequels. The first movie was fine as a standalone story.
If you give them a hard time and ask for a lot of money, they can't go to William Shatner and say...
But studios want a safe bet, and they were so invested in making Hannibal, they even had possible replacements for Anthony Hopkins. And I think of Hannibal whenever I think of Solace, because there's probably a universe where they made 8 even without Fincher's or Morgan Freeman's blessing. It's wild to me that while they probably could have made a lot more money doing a bad 7 sequel, they decided not to. A studio saw this script with the title 8 slapped on it, no actor for 7 signed on, no director, and instead of just powering through like other producers did with Hannibal, they decided against destroying 7's legacy And I think that's pretty great. Solace is still a bad movie, by the way, and it should have stayed on that shelf.